Yeah, so thank you all for showing up. I was thinking just one would show up, but see like 8 of you, 9 of you. It's a good turnout. So this is about the tools you need to get started with Ionic. So let's just jump right in. Who am I? It's a fantastic picture of me. It was taken with my iPhone. I'm Brendan. I'm a web developer at Oasis Digital. I've been here for about a year and a half, working on large-scale enterprise apps. And recently, I've been introduced to Ionic, which is what this talk is about. I also help teach Angular Bootcamp as well. If you're interested in that, head to our website and check it out. We also have a lot of other training as well in our training tab. And I'm also an actor, so I kind of just want to show this real quick. It's like a shameless plug for myself. So feel free to check this out. So, oh my gosh. Cool. Did not plan for that to happen. Okay. All right. I am not. Someday I might be in Frozen 3. But anyway, so yeah, shameless plug. So if this talk goes south, I do have a fallback. So we're good to go. All right, now let me get out of this and back here. Brilliant. So that's a bit about me, but let's jump right in. And I kind of want to just paint a picture here. So let's say you're at this tech company and your boss calls you into their office and they're like, hey, I want you to make an app. And you're like, okay, I've done that many times. I've built an application before. But the trick is they're like, hey, I want it on iOS, I want it on Android, I want it on Windows, I want it on Mac, and I want a web app. So you probably should feel that bead of sweat start rolling down your face, and you're like, oh no, oh no. So panic, right? At least you should be. So what's the problem? What am I panicking about? Well, if I break this down, immediately I start thinking about screen sizes, because we don't just have one screen size, we have many. If you just think about the iPad lineup, there's an iPad mini, there's an iPad, which is like a 9.7 inch, a 10.2 inch, and I think a 10.5 inch. Then there's the iPad Pro, which goes up to 11.9 inches, I think, potentially a 12 inch. Don't quote me on that. And that's just iPad. And there's also Android as well with a 10.1. And then we have monitors, which can be very wide or very narrow. And along with this, we start thinking about different operating systems. We got Android, we got iOS, we got Windows, Mac OS. What do we do with that? Well, that means different languages. With Android, you'll be developing in Android Studio and using Java, Xcode and Swift for iOS, .NET Visual Studio Code with Windows, Swift and Xcode for Mac OS. But that's really expensive. So if we start thinking about a company hiring a team of developers, that means you're going to have, for what we know right now, if we're developing an iOS, an Android app, Mac OS, and for Windows, we're going to have separate teams here because that requires a specific expertise in each one of these languages, which is super costly, not to mention the fact that there's this communication issue that we got going on, different code bases that we're dealing with. Each one of those languages has a different implementation for doing the same sort of thing. So it's like a lot is going on here, and that's not a scalable approach. And also new hires coming in. Think about that, jumping on to a team and having one code base, and maybe they're told to go to a different team, and they started out in Android, now they're in Mac OS, and that's a lot of code maintenance to deal with as well. So what do we do? Well, let's talk about what we know. The web is literally everywhere. All modern devices are capable of supporting web technologies, and they do. Our phones, our laptops, our desktop computers. We got TVs. We have refrigerators now, for crying out loud, and toasters. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that, toasters. So also HTML, CSS and JavaScript is relatively easier to pick up. And the web is the largest platform in the world, which means it's going to come with the largest pool of developers in the world. Here's an example of some web technology on multiple devices. It's Pandora. I don't know if you all have used that. It's a very popular application. We got a desktop app up in the upper left-hand corner, upper right, iPad, down below that, iPhone, and then we got it on a watch as well. Just showing that these different devices support web technologies. We've all seen this before. So what would be our ideal scenario here? Well, we want responsive UI. We want auto-adjusting UI for screen size. And we also want it to adjust for design as well, because we don't want to even have to worry about this design scheme and to fit our platform. We want something that's going to do that for us automatically. We want access to native features, things like camera, Bluetooth, GPS, our file system. And we want to code once for multiple platforms. That's the biggest thing. We want one code base and many platforms. That sounds like a more scalable approach to me. This is easily maintainable and manageable for new hires and other employees as well, other teams. So let me introduce you to Ionic. Well, what is Ionic? Well, it's a UI toolkit for building mobile, desktop, and progressive web apps. It's written with TypeScript and Node.js, and it has official Ionic Framework integration with Angular and React. And if you're interested in Vue.js, that's in development right now too. But what does it actually offer us? It offers a large, robust component library that we can use. And these components are responsive to all screen sizes. Plus, they're responsive to design for the platform. So let me just go to the Ionic website and look at these UI components. So this is the Ionic website, and you can click on components. Is that good? Cool. And over to the left here, we just see a bunch of components that we can drop into our HTML and use. These, the links right below these headers here, generally you can click on those and it'll give you an example of what you're wanting to use. So an ion fob, for instance, you'll see over here it gives you an example of these fobs. And the cool thing is there's a toggle up here. So we're showing iOS right now, but if we show material design, which is what Android uses, click on that, and the icons change, and the UI changes for us, auto-magically. This is a very, very powerful tool. Plus, also with these Ionic components, you can also use plain old HTML. You can toss a div into an Ion card if you want to. Ionic also offers an Ion icon library. So if I head there as well, we have this whole list of these icons here that you can choose from. Now if I start typing in like Earth, okay, that doesn't come up with anything. Let's try globe. And we get a little icon of the Earth right there, plus a planet. And then also we can toggle the style as well. So you see that that changes up too. And this style change is all automatic. You don't have to do anything. You can specify which one you want, but you also can leave Ionic to do that for you. It'll automatically give you the right icon for the platform that you're on. So how do we use Ionic? So there's two paths you can take. The first one is framework agnostic. So you can literally just copy and paste these two script tags and this link into a plain old HTML file. Right in the header tag, and you'll immediately be able to use these components. You don't have to do anything special besides copy and pasting those 3 lines into your HTML tag. And you can pop in an Ion card if you want to, an Ion image, that sort of thing, and be able to use it right away. The second is with a framework. And that's the recommended approach, because you're not really going to get a scalable app the other way around. If you're just using plain old HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, that's a bunch of just JavaScript tossed onto a .js file, and that's not a scalable approach. There's no real structure to that. Whereas if you have something like Angular or React, that will give you that structure. And if you have any complex logic as well, that fits in there perfectly with these components and smart and dumb view components. So the Ionic CLI, this is the command line interface for Ionic. It offers you app scaffolding and serving. So when you do an Ionic start, which I'll show you in the next slide, that's going to build out a whole entire Angular application for you with Ionic components in there. You can also serve it to your local host. It gives you error reporting, TypeScript transpiling, code bundling, and it uses the Angular CLI underneath. So if you do anything like creating a pipe or a service or a component, a module, that's all using the Angular CLI underneath, which is great because Angular is maintaining that, and we know that that's going to be consistent every time we use it. Now, to get Ionic on your system, you do an npm install-g Ionic. And if we want to do it for React, you toss a flag at the end of that with -- type equals React. And that's how you can use it with React. And then what commands do I run after that to get started with an actual project? You want to use Ionic start my app tabs. And what that's saying is I'm using Ionic. I'm going to start a new application. I'm going to call it my app. And the last thing is passing in a template. So there are 3 templates that you can use right off the bat. One is blank, the second one is tabs, and the third one is a side menu. And it automatically pops out the scaffolding that you need for those templates. But you can also use Ionic start, just plain old Ionic start. And what that's going to give you is a little bit of a UI, and it'll ask you questions of like, what's your app name? Do you even want to use Ionic for? It'll also ask you for the template that you want as well. And after the end of the installation, it'll ask you if you want to use this thing called AppFlow SDK, which I'll talk about more about that when I get to that point. Once you create your app, you're going to use Ionic serve. And this is going to put your application and run it in localhost at port 8100. This options right here are other flags that you can toss in there. You can toss in a flag of like --SSL, and that's going to allow your dev server to use HTTPS. When you run Ionic start, it does build out this full application for you. It is an Angular web app, and you'll be using these Ionic icons and Ionic components in there. So the 2 different sizes here is just to show that these components will be changing for the screen size. So if you open up your app, you use Ionic serve and open it up at your localhost 8100, and you can toggle between sizes of your screen. Those components will size accordingly for you. So in our steps to the ideal process, or what we really want, we have responsive UI now. We have these Ionic components and Ion icons that change for the platform too. So not only screen size, but for the platform. So we don't have to worry about resizing. They auto-adjust. We don't have to learn about or figure out how to change the design. Like if I want to pop a button into my page, I don't want to have to worry about, oh, I got to put a border on this button. I got to put some sort of shadow on it or something. I don't have to worry about that. This is automatic. It'll change for your platform. Next thing we want is native features. So let me introduce to you Apache Cordova and Capacitor. But I'm really going to talk about Capacitor though, because Capacitor is the transition away from Apache Cordova. It allows your app to run natively on an Android and iOS device inside a web view. And it's optimized for the Ionic framework because it's built and maintained by Ionic. It offers a JavaScript API to access native features like I talked about, like GPS and Bluetooth, the file system, flashlight, camera. It has a plugin API for custom native functionality. If you want to make your own plugins, you can do that. And it also has a compatibility layer with existing Cordova plugins. So the thing with Capacitor is Ionic wanted like an in-house app runtime that they could control, and so they're kind of going away from the Apache approach. However, Capacitor doesn't have as many plugins as Cordova has. So there's that compatibility layer just so you can use those Cordova plugins as well. Also, Capacitor allows you to deploy to app stores and the web. What commands do I run to use Capacitor? Well, you want to make sure that you do Ionic start. And then in your application, you're going to do npm install -- save to install a Capacitor core and the Capacitor CLI. Once that is complete, then run npx cap init. If you're not familiar with npx, it's coming from npm 5, which says that you can run local binaries and scripts without doing a global install. So you'll do npx cap init, and then after that, Capacitor has been initialized for your app. You'll have to make sure that you type in your app name, give your app an ID, a package ID, and that's all you need to do. And then Capacitor is initialized, and at that point, you'll be able to run npx cap add Android, iOS, or Electron to get those projects created for you by Capacitor. So before adding Capacitor, this is what I showed you before. We just have a normal application, an Angular project using Ionic. Now, after adding Capacitor, it looks like this. So this might be a little overwhelming. So let me break it down for you. So we have these two different frameworks. We have a UI framework and the Angular framework. And once we run Ionic start, it combines those two and makes a blank a starter application for us. Then, when we do npx cap add Android, and again, that has to be after you initialize Capacitor, that's where your app is going. Capacitor creates this native app with a web view in it. And that web view is going to be housing your application. And then plus the JavaScript API layer in between the web view and the native view is what's going to give you access to the native features. That way you can actually use the flashlight or camera. So I'm just going to show this again. And what I wanted to show here, it's a subtle difference, but so iOS, you'll see like I just put an underline and italicized Ion icons and Ionic components just to show that there will be a difference between the two when you do a build. So I also kind of introduced Electron momentarily, but let me actually fully introduce it to you. Think of Electron as the capacitor for desktop. It's going to create these binaries for Windows and Mac OS and Linux, and it runs your app in a minimal web browser. But it looks like a native app, which is the good thing. What commands do I run to use this? Well, npx cap add Electron, npx cap copy, and I'll explain npx cap copy when I get to the demo, and then npx cap open Electron, which will open an instance of Electron for you. And the open command down there, that's the same thing you would run for Android and iOS. And Capacitor will open up Xcode for you, and will open up Android Studio for you, and you'll be able to run your app from there. Now, just to clarify, Capacitor is not building the iOS or Android app for you. That's what Android Studio does, and that's what Xcode does. but like creating the native app. But Capacitor is giving you that scaffolding, that native app with that web view, and tossing your application in the middle of that. And then when you actually do the real build in Android Studio or Xcode, that's going to be the real application right there. So you do have to do the build within that particular IDE, Android Studio or Xcode. So in our steps to ideal, we have the responsive UI, we have the native features, and also we got one code base. Because we're just using Angular as that's our main code. And we're using Ionic as like the HTML of that, which is going to resize for your screens and change design as well for the platform that it's on. And then Capacitor is what actually gives us those native features. It gives us access to the flashlight, camera, file system. Now, as far as debugging goes, if you're running your application as a normal web app with Ionic Serve, you can use the Chrome DevTools. However, there's no support for Cordova. So if you're doing any sort of like debugging of your app icon or your splash screen, and it's coming from Cordova, you won't be able to see that. However, there are some plugins, some Capacitor plugins that do work. And we'll be able to see that in the demo. When you're using Android Studio, you have the logs in that IDE. But you can also go to this type Chrome // inspect into your Chrome search box, and then type on developer or click on developer and open up your simulator there, or your emulator. Xcode is sort of the same thing. They have their own developer tooling in Safari, and both of those are a pretty powerful tool. The Safari developer tooling, as well as the Chrome inspector. Those are pretty powerful. I've definitely used those during my Ionic development. Demo time. Okay, so let me get out of here. And so I'm opening up a command prompt because I'm on a Windows machine. And when you install the Ionic CLI, if you're on Windows, like let's say you're using your Git Bash terminal, well, Ionic hasn't like created enough support for that yet. So like things like Ionic Start, and you get that little UI with it, that's not going to work. The recommended approach is to use your normal command prompt because Git Bash has not been optimized yet. However, if you're in the Mac world, you don't have to worry about that. So I recommend that. iOS is my favorite. Mac OS is the best. Anyway, enough of that. Well, here we are. So let me go ahead and navigate into a folder that I created. And it eludes me what I had created. Okay. Okay, so at this point, I have run npm install ionic-g. So now I can do ionic start. And like I was saying, it does this thing where it asks you to try Ionic 4, and of course I want to try Ionic 4. Enter a project name. I'm going to call it camera flashlight app. It's probably a terrible name, but here we are. I'll do that. And then it gives you this little selection thing down at the bottom where you can choose your templates, like blank, side menu, or tabs. I'm just going to hit blank. If you want to, feel free to like check those out later on or do it while you're here. Yeah. And so it's going to do an npm install. And it's going to build out the main scaffolding of our app. And it will look like a normal Angular app. Wish I had some like elevator music right now. It'd be nice.
Live npm install, that's great.
I know. I mean, it's all part of the process. I got to do it. This would be a good time to get some gulps in for the recording. Brilliant. Awesome. So at the end of this, it is going to ask for that, AppFlow SDK. It's going to say if I want to add that to my application. I'm not going to do it, but that's a way for you to hook up your app with your GitHub. And it helps you out with deployments or releases of your app. So anytime you make a commit to your repo, it's going to release your app for you. Yeah, down here, I'm just going to say, no, I don't want that. And then if you've ever done like a ng start, or ng new, I mean, you'll see these exact same files that are generated. So at this point, I can go into that. And open up my editor. I use VS Code. I know like one person that uses WebStorm. I don't know if any of you use WebStorm, but it's expensive. Well, you never know. I've heard many people who have worked with, well, I don't know them personally, but I've heard that people at Microsoft have used other things. So I don't know. Sounds like a problem for you guys, not me. Anyway, WebStorm seems a little bougie to me. Anyway, so at this point, we do have just a normal Angular app. If I open up the source right here, you can see our app, our assets, environments, this theme right here, global CSS, and Angular would be just styles CSS. Ionic does automatically give you Sass, which is cool. I like Sass. Outside of our source directory, we also have the end-to-end E2E folder for end-to-end testing, classic node modules. All of this should look familiar as well. If I go into our app here, you can see our app HTML has this Ion app with an Ion router outlet in here. These are all Ionic isms, Ionic components. We have an app routing module because Ionic 4, which is the newest version of Ionic, uses the Angular router now, which is great because before it was in like Ionic 3, and before it was using this like nav controller thing, which was like this push pop mechanism. It was pretty glitchy at times, and you've had to make like workarounds for that. But it's cool that we have the Angular support with this. And we have our home right here. And you'll see this on all of the pages. It's like Ion content and Ion header. These are like the main page structure for your HTML. Now I want to serve this. So we're just serving up our app at localhost 8100. So this should open up automatically for me. I shouldn't have to go to my browser. And there's two main flags that you can put at the end of Ionic serve that I like to use. So you can see this is a normal web app now that this is opened up. If I hit F12, it brings me to like the mobile view, And see how it says iPhone 6 and 7 up here? I need to refresh my page. And once I do that, now it will look like iOS. But until I did that, it wasn't going to look that way. I can click that, and it still has the styling for iOS. However, if I was to change this to be like Galaxy S5, kind of changed it up a little bit. When I hit refresh, then it's actually going to change it up to be consistent with your platform. There's these two flags that I'm talking about. One is -L, and what that's going to do is it's like the Ionic Lab, and it will open up a browser tab for you. I think it's also at port 8200. So I might actually be able to just get that up as well. Ionic serve -L. Oh, 8101. Okay. So, but this is going to give you this view of like two phones. One will be an iOS device, and the other one is going to be an Android device to give you like a side-by-side comparison immediately. So you'll be able to see the differences in UI at that point. I use them primarily for just like, oh, Ionic Lab, I do want to install that. Yes. I used the Ionic Lab for just like UI purposes. Other time, like if you're trying to do anything with like the native features of an application, that's not going to work. It's mostly just for like the visual between the two devices, like a side-by-side comparison. Yeah. Pretty cool, right? Yeah. Okay. The next thing is, all right, I'm going to cancel that. Are you all able to connect to the internet on your phone? Yeah? Well, if you can, it'd be cool to download Ionic Dev App. And hopefully this works. Sometimes it doesn't, but go to your app store. You could be on iOS or Android and get Ionic Dev App. And actually, I'll so it should have like a symbol like this over here. I don't know if y'all can see that. But if you get that, you do, I think, need to sign in with like an email. But once you do that, you'll open it up and make sure you're on the same Wi-Fi that I'm on. And you'll be presented with the app that I have hosted with the Ionic Serve -- Dev App. So let me go ahead and do that. So you should sort of get to a screen that, I don't know if y'all can see this, but looks like this. I know I picked like the smallest device for this. Probably should have picked like an iPad or something. But I found that sometimes, depending on your network, you won't be able to see the app that you're running. So I'm not sure if this is going to work. But if you're testing out a project, this would be really cool to do. Like potentially if you go home and it's not working here. That's awesome. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm not seeing this come up right now. I tested this at home, I promise. but it should pop up here. So if you're at home and on a network that probably doesn't have restrictions, it's really cool because you can tap on that icon and it literally like lets you view your app on your device. The downfall again with that is you can't use any of the native features, but you get to see the dang thing on a real device, which is cool. And it also is responsive to your platform at that point as well. Did anybody actually like try it and get it to work? Fair enough. Still downloading? Really?
It didn't pop up for me. I tried it with another Ionic product, I couldn't find it either, and I've done it as well.
Oh man.
So it's the network.
It's the network. That's unfortunate. All right, well that would have been really cool, but that's okay. All right, so what I want to do is I want to build out a little app. And so I'm going to make like a camera / flashlight app. And what I want to use, like my goals, I want to use a capacitor plugin. I want to use a Cordova plugin, just so we can see the difference between the two, how to implement them. I want to use some Ion components and an Ion icon. And then I want to position those components on our screen. And that'll be our app. So I'm going to get out of both of these and go back to my code. All right. So since this is one page, I'm going to go ahead and delete that content right there. And I want to add 2 Ion fobs. These are like these little floating circle things that are on your screen. And I'm going to use them as buttons, but I'm going to position them at the bottom corners of my screen. And one's going to be for the camera, and one's going to be for the flashlight. So in my Ion content, I'm going to add a fob. And then in there, I want an Ion fob button. And the only reason I'm able to remember this is because I've done it so many times at this point. This is all just coming from the Ionic documentation on their components tab. And then I'll have an Ion icon in here. Cool. And the first one I want to create is I want this to be the camera button. So if you go to your Ion icons, I think I might still have this up, and type in camera. See this camera down here, and literally it shows you the name at the bottom. That's probably really hard for you all to see. But I could literally just copy and paste this right here, but I'm just going to type it out. I have camera. And I want to position this Ion fob. So there's some attributes that I'm going to give values to. One is vertical. This is saying, like, vertically speaking, like, where on this page do I want to have this button? Do I want to have it at the top, in the center, or the bottom? I'm going to say bottom. And then horizontal is another one. And this will be start. So if I save that, fingers crossed. Hey, there we go. Awesome. And I just realized that this says Ion blank up here, so I'm going to change that real quick. Camera and flashlight. And I do want 2 of these buttons, these fobs, because one's going to be for the camera and one's going to be for the flashlight. I'm going to change this to say end, because I want it to appear at the end, or the right side, the bottom of my screen. I'll change this to be, let me see, just type in flashlight, and it's literally just flashlight. Awesome. Okay, so I save that, and let's see what that looks like now. Cool, so we have both of our buttons here, and I'm going to add a couple of click handlers on here. I'm going to be binding to the click event. I'm going to pass in take picture. I'm also going to create one for the flashlight. Click, and this will be toggle torch. And I always like to copy and paste this so I don't make a typo. So let me go into my component, and underneath my constructor, I'm going to make that function declaration there. Go back to my HTML so I can also get the toggle torch. Cool. And then I'm just going to do a couple of console logs just to make sure they're working properly. Yep. Wow. Be probably pretty good to put it in the function. Toggle torch. And then I also want to do a console log here as well for picture taken. Oh my gosh, I keep doing a capital. All right, cool. Let's get back out here. Let's just make sure that these are working properly. Something is happening. There we go. Okay, now we're good. Whew. It wasn't working for like a split second. I start getting that bead of sweat. Okay, awesome. It works. Cool. Let's go back here. Okay. I'm also going to add an image in here because I do want that to sort of be a placeholder for when I do take a picture. So I'm going to put an image tag. I'm using a normal image tag right here. You can use an Ion image tag if you want to, but this shows that I can use normal HTML in here as well. And I'm going to bind to the source attributes and pass in a relative path of a picture. Oh, you can't see them very well. Anyway, there's this really cute frog right here, or this really cute panda that's like waving at you. Panda? Yes. All right, that sounds really good to me. Okay. So I'm going to copy this. So I've tried doing like a copy and paste into my assets here, and it like wasn't working. So that's why I'm taking this really long path to get to my assets, and I will paste that right there. Close that, and I should see that the assets was updated. Cool. Panda .jpg, and then make sure I put assets in front of that. And since this is an Angular expression, I want to make sure it is also a string, not in double quotes. Oh my gosh. Boom. All right. Hey. This is a cute panda, right? Thank you. Okay. All right. So now at this point, I do want to try and get the camera app working. So the camera plugin that I'm using is the capacitor one. So that means that I do need to install capacitor and initialize capacitor for this application. So I'll go back here. Okay, and so I'm going to do, I have like a couple of notes here just to make it easier. So that is npm install -f save capacitor core capacitor CLI. I'll install that. And again, we're doing a local install, so that way we can have like multiple versions of capacitor and other apps. Cool. All right, so now that we've installed capacitor, we do need to initialize capacitor. Remember that weird npx thing that we have to type that in, and then cap for capacitor, and then init for initialize. And then it's going to ask me some questions like app name, what is it? And it's camera flashlight app. And then it asks you for an app package ID in the form of com.example.app. .example is like your business. .app is the name of the app. So I'm just going to do, I'm going to be very original here. Camera flashlight app. Cool. And if you want to use npm or yarn, I'm using npm. All right. So now that I've initialized that, it shows me at this point that I can do an npx cap add Android, npx cap add iOS or Electron. And I don't know why it doesn't say to do this next thing that I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to show the error that's produced when you actually just do this. npx cap add Android. It's going to be like error, could not find the web assets directory. So you can't really do this just yet. You have to do an Ionic build. Then Ionic build is going to transpile your application into JavaScript and a bunch of maps and put it in a web directory. And then at that point, capacitor will look at that to build out your Android Studio project and your iOS project. So I do have to do Ionic build, unfortunately, and that's kind of a lengthy process. Angular 8. And something to mention with that, actually, thanks for bringing this up. It is version 8, and so right now, there's something funky with Electron, where if you try to do npx cap open Electron after you've added Electron, it doesn't render your app properly. It says it's looking for these 4 JavaScript files. And apparently it's a thing with Angular 8. That's the problem. And there's been a lot of workarounds for it. And I've experimented with 2 of the main ones. There's some sort of base href and the index.html inside of the Electron folder that's created. And in the href, there's a /, but they say if you just put a period in front of that, then it works. So I went there and it was already there. So that's great. And then the other one was to go into your TypeScript configuration and change the ES 2015 to just ES5. And that was supposed to do the trick, but I tried it and it did not. So anyway, okay, we're at this point. We've done an Ionic build, and now we can I'm going to hook up that function now for the camera. So let me go to my home page here. Now, because I've initialized capacitor, and I've added that to my application. Now I have access to the plugins that come along with capacitor. So if I go to my notepad, I don't remember these off the top of my head, but here's the import that we need. It's the plugins, the camera result type, and the camera source. These are 3 things that we need to get this camera function working. And this is literally coming from the Ionic docs. So you'll literally be able to see this exact code. So I'm going to get rid of take picture here. And, my gosh. Okay, let me go back. There we go. Okay, so there's some red in here, and I'll fix that in just a second, but I do want to explain what's going on. So we have this take picture function, and we have this local variable in here called image, and we're using the plugins here. So plugins, and there's a camera property on the plugins, which does have a method in there of get photo. This returns a promise, and we're handling that with this async in front of the function and the await right here. And now we get this URL back, and for Angular to know that it's a safe URL, we need to pass it into this function called bypass security trust resource URL. That's coming from the DOM sanitizer, which is an Angular-ism. And I also want to make sure that my imports are ordered. So I'm going to leave it at that. In my constructor, I want to use the dependency injection system of Angular to inject the DOM sanitizer private. Down here, we did call it sanitizer, so I'm going to copy that, paste it right here, and give it a type of DOM sanitizer. And now photo, that's where the safe resource URL comes in. I copy that, and I do need to create this as a property on my component, photo of type resource URL. Save that. It looks like we are good to go. However, I'm only displaying that panda picture. So what I want to do is I want to say, if that photo exists, then display it. But if it doesn't, I want to show assets panda JPEG. So I will save this, and we will go to our app here. I don't know what's happening. Let me just stop this and run it again. And when I run this and we click on the take picture button, I'm expecting there to be some sort of error there. All right. So I click this, and it's like, whoa, camera modal.component on ready is not a function. And we can look further down, and we see camera plugin web. So Capacitor's way of using the camera in Chrome is with their PWA elements. It's a part of Capacitor, and so you do need to install that, PWA elements. Install that in your application, because that's what allows you to be able to use your laptop camera. And once that is installed, kind of have to do this funky thing again. Like, I didn't figure this out. This is a thing that's in the docs, so you just refer to that. So I'm gonna copy that. All right, so that's in there. And what they want you to do is place it in your main.ts. I'm gonna do that up here. Okay. And then call that function, define custom elements, and we're passing in our global window object. Okay. Oh, man. There we go. Okay. So let me click on the camera. Oh, that's really washed out. Wow. We can save that, and boom. There we go. Yeah. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So at this point, we do want to get this working on a device. So it's already set up for that. And you can generally tell that you're good to go as if you receive some sort of, well, let me talk about that when I get there with Cordova. If you're trying to use some sort of plugin and you're using some like function with it, it'll generally like give you some sort of error, which means you're on the right track to getting it to work. So, all right, let me try to get this flashlight working. So we have the capacitor plugin working now, but now this is for Cordova. So this is the process to do it. We need to get the Cordova plugin and add it to our project, and we do it with Ionic Cordova plugin add, and then the name of the plugin. So I'll come back here and then add it to my application. Once that's added, then I can install the Ionic native flashlight, because our native app still needs to get access to the native flashlight of our phone. And then the plugin, the Cordova plugin, is what bridges that gap between our web app and that native, the Ionic native package that we just installed. So now let me do an npm install of this native flashlight. And you don't have to do anything with that camera plugin at this point. It just kind of like is out there, and behind the scenes it helps you out. So we won't be seeing that anymore. We'll just be seeing the results of that. However, we do need to import this flashlight module into the module of our page that we're using it in. And it is a provider. It's not a service, because this is back from Cordova, and Cordova was around with Ionic 1, 2, and 3, and they used providers, but now we're using services. So I will create the providers array and pass in flashlight. So I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to import that flashlight from Ionic Native. Ionic Native flashlight ngx. So we paste that in there, save it. And now we have access to this flashlight. So I'm going to copy this. And I'm also going to import that into my home page. And since I want to use this flashlight object, I do need to also, again, inject it into my components. Now I'll call it FL for flashlight of type flashlight. It's going to be a super long amount of code here. There we go. All right. So let's save that and see what Chrome tells us. I'm going to turn on that flashlight. Oh, I guess it didn't load all the way yet. Oh, it did. Okay. All right. See here, this is what I'm talking about. So like, I know I'm on the right track because it said, tried calling flashlight.toggle, but Cordova is not available. What I was talking about. Cordova isn't available here. So this is where now we can actually create our Android app. I don't have a Mac with me, so that's unfortunate, but we'll create an Android app. Let me make this bigger. And I'm going to make sure everything's saved. I'm going to do another Ionic build. Because I want to make sure that web directory is up to date with my changes. So I do the Ionic build. And then I want to do npx cap update. And what that's going to do is that's going to look at my plugins and make sure they're good and updated. And then let me just wait for this to finish. Okay, npx cap update. Okay, and then we'll do npx cap copy because we want this. What this this command is doing is copying your web directory, so that way Capacitor can make the build out for your Android project. So npx cap copy. Okay. And then at that point, we'll do npx cap add Android. And Capacitor is looking at those copied files, and it's installing the Android dependencies, and it's going to build out this Android project for you. So now at this point, if you don't have Android Studio installed, you should probably do that. Go through the whole installation process. Make sure you turn on Haxum and hardware acceleration, so that way you can use the emulators, the Android emulators. And I think at that point, you'll be able to create some virtual devices, or the emulators, and you'll be able to allocate some RAM to them, and you'll be able to choose which version of Android you want them to have. So I'll do npx cap open Android, and you should see Android Studio open up at the bottom. So I've already done that. I've already downloaded Android Studio, and I have a device already built out. What's up? If it asks specifically for Haxum, I'm not sure about Hyper. It doesn't give you that option from what I've seen. So maybe that'd be cool to find out if you can use that, but I'm not sure. Okay, so now that our application is in here, we're going to be building it with Android Studio. So again, Capacitor does not do the build. Capacitor is like taking your web app and putting it in to this native app with that web view. And now we can actually build it with Android Studio. So you can see here, I already made a device. It's a Pixel 2. But if you click on this, I wonder if I can make this bigger. Font, increase font. Oh boy. Okay, this isn't really helping me. Okay, there's this little icon up here that looks like a phone with a little Android guy in front of it. And at this point, you'll be able to click on Create Virtual Device. And you can click the device you want, Pixel 3a if you want, click Next. And then this is where you can choose what version of Android you want. I always end up choosing like the second from the top or the third from the top just because it's going to hit the most users. But you can do whatever you want. So this one is using Android 9. And now if I click on this play button up here, then this is what's actually doing the build of your application and starting up your emulator. And it's pretty funny how they allow you to take a picture with this phone. I don't know if you guys have ever run this before and had an emulator and tried to take a picture with it. It's very, very interesting. So I'll show you that in a second. No, it'll automatically load up. It's in very small font down at the bottom. It's like saying that Gradle build is running, and then after that it'll say like, if you're using a real device, it'll say install, but in a second you'll see this thing pop up. Yeah, install. There we go. Our application is running. Cool beans. All right, so this is a real app. I can put this on my phone if I want to. You just literally take your phone and hook it up to a USB, and you're good to go. You do have to set up developer mode on your phone. And the funky way to do that, this is an S5 that I'm using. And if you go to settings and then go to about, it's like about phone, and then you like click 7 times on your build, it'll like have a countdown too. And when you get to 7 clicks, then it'll be like, you're in developer mode. And you can get out of there and you'll see a developer mode, like little icon with some settings in there. And you can click on, I think it's like developer debugging. And then at that point, once you hook up your phone, you'll be able to do this. So let me click on this camera icon, and then I'll click allow. Got it. And then you see this like weird thing. Like, this is so strange. But I'll hold down Alt, and then I can like look around. It's like this house. I'm not sure why that oven is so huge, but like, let me walk up to that. I'm gonna try to wash my hands, but I can't reach that, so it's just very, very strange. I don't know if their idea was you're like a child walking around or something, or I don't know. Anyway, so I could take a picture. Bam. And then it'll ask me to accept the picture. I do. And bam, there's the picture. Brilliant, yes. But the last thing I do want to show, though, is I do want to put it on my phone as well. So I'm not sure if I've figured out a smooth way to do this yet. So I'm just going to connect my phone and see if this will show up right away. It should be in the drop down up here. Oh, sweet. And this way I can show you the flashlight actually working. And when I'm done showing that, I'll kind of just like switch up the HTML just a little bit, and maybe add like a gallery, and then see how we can use that with CSS Grid, which is the CSS framework that's getting a lot more popular. It's how CSS should be. We'll be offering a class on that soon in the future as well, and also an Ionic class if that's something that you're interested in. So just like be active on our website and look at our training tab. We have a bunch of courses on there. I'll show that at the end. But I do have it on my phone, and I can disconnect it, and it literally is downloaded already on the phone, so I can show everybody. But it asks me allow camera flashlight app, take pictures and record. I'll hit allow, and it's working. The only thing is you can't use the camera and the flashlight at the same time, but whatever. Yeah. How much time we got? Probably wrap up. Okay, all right. So just know that you can use CSS Grid. However, on my S5, it doesn't really show up too well. I think it's because of the compatibility of the browser in here. But if I was to show it on the emulator here, CSS Grid does work. So anyway, anybody have any questions about this? I won't have it on Oasis Digital's website, but I can get it to you if you want. Yeah?
If you put it on GitHub, send me a message, I can put it on the Meetup. You can find it through the Meetup.
Cool. I'll also put this app out there as well, so you can refer to that too. Yeah.
We're recording the video, right? So that'll be on YouTube. Yeah. Just look under the Meetup, I guess. Get into the Meetup.
Yeah, I'll post a message on there when we get that content available.
I actually want to do all the things.
Yeah. Oh, it's so cool, man. Ionic is like extremely powerful. Seems like a pretty scalable approach to getting multiple platforms out there for an app. Using what? Xamarin? I haven't. What is Xamarin? Oh. Huh. You guys are trying to sell this to me? They're trying to sell it to me. I'm looking right in the camera. They're trying to sell me something. This is marketing. Oh, nice. I'll have to look at that. That'd be really cool. Very native. Cool. Definitely check that out. Oh, well, I wish I could, but I'll need to check that out for sure. XAML. Nice. Look at that. Look at Microsoft. Look at them go. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned something about Ionic and take this with you and start making some apps.
So before everyone heads out, I just want to give a quick shout out to Oasis, the company that
Oh, yeah.
provides the food, and again, thanks to Microsoft for hosting the space.